I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Firebird. If you saw in the previous videos, I've done the trunk, the floor, frame rails in it. We did the cowl panel, the dash panel, and the firewall, everything up front. Pretty much this car is turning into almost a total build. We only kept a couple parts to it. On this video, it should be a little bit of change of scenery as we're pretty much just doing the bolt-on panel. So you saw our outer rockers, we just screwed in, we didn't weld it in. We're gonna try to align our doors off of these rockers. We're gonna work on bolting on the fenders, the hood, and the front bumper. So stay tuned, I'll show you some tips and tricks on how to go about, aligning everything. I just did that Cuda behind us, the front end installing that. Thinking about now, I probably could have done a video out the same time that we did, a Mopar front end versus a Firebird, or the F-body front ends, Nova front ends. I think these GM cars, the front ends get a little bit more challenging after you've done Mopars for so long. So stay tuned, we're gonna try to work to it. The front end's already been test fit once, so hopefully it should go together pretty good and we don't spend a lot of time modifying a lot of stuff, but I'll go through what a lot of stuff I did do to modify to help get everything aligned a little better. All right, before we throw the doors on the Firebird, we'll go ahead and just swap out the door bolt hinges for new ones. The old ones were just rusted. We use them for mocked up purposes. So Chase is doing that door. I already started on this one. One thing we did end up doing, we had to take, since they were aftermarket hinges, we took a deburrer tool, and the doors on both sides, on the Goodmark and the Dynacorn door, they were sitting low on the car just in general everywhere. I believe the rockers are in the right place as they're snug up against the quarters and everything. So a lot of our original hinges really weren't rebuildable. They were bent and everything. I mean, I guess I could have spent a lot of time, but it's easier for me to get these hinges, modify them. So what I ended up doing was taking the deburrer tool, and we're basically going the direction that we wanted to go with the door. So if we wanted to lift them up, we had to deburr the hole down. So that's going to let the door come up, being that this is the bottom of the door and this is the top. Then what I ended up doing, just to make it a little bit cleaner, I came back through with a welder, and right in this area I welded up where the old holes were, and then I cleaned it out. So that should be our adjustment. We kind of recenter our adjustment basically. So a little piece of advice: get some door bolts, put the doors on. Feel free to use the deburrer tool. I use this on pretty much the whole front end. I think a lot of these front end parts are put together on the outer skin and inner structure, and then when they're stamped together, they're just not stamped in the right place, which gives them a really bad rap. So we're gonna go ahead, like I said, he's almost done swapping out the door hinges. When we put this door on, they should be pretty close because we've already done this, but I'm gonna leave the door bolts just a little bit loose, so we have a little bit of play up and down while we adjust the door. These doors have already been on it, so I'm pretty confident they're gonna fit, but we'll see what we got. All right, so I was saying, you want the hinges, well, they'll move, but they're not really loose. So basically, the looser they are, it's going to want to sag the door. So be aware, once you tighten these up, it's going to pull up the door. But this is going to go back. 2 people helps easier on this job, and it's going to be a fine-tuning thing. You're going to have to go back and keep moving it. The chances you get the first time are slim to none. So show you how we do it. Luckily, with no glass and everything, the doors are a lot lighter. Like I said, this is a Goodmark door. It came on another project, and I got it because it was damaged by the last person. Grab the end. So Chase gonna hold it up in the back, and what we're doing first, we're gonna get the bolts in first. There's at least 2 of them to get started. I'm gonna do my best to try fast forward all the parts like this, where we're just putting the door bolts in. There's no method to madness. Again, leave these bolts loose where the door is still able to move, but they're kind of snugged up. All right, so what he's gonna do, we're gonna first align off this rocker. So we're right in line with this rocker down here. What I like to do, stick basically a pry bar in the bottom, and we're looking at the bottom rocker gap. Obviously, we're gonna have to go in, but these bolts should pull us in. So we basically want to get 2 of them started first, and then we'll go ahead through and tighten the rest of them. And see, we're walking back, so we gotta go forward a little bit. Most hinges are gonna try to move with you while you're adjusting them. That makes it real hard. All right, so what we're gonna end up doing now, you can see we're back a little bit, but again, this rocker down here is adjustable. So we gotta figure out if we're gonna move our door or our rocker. What I wanna do then, see how this is still adjustable because we left our hinges up top loose. We're gonna go in all the way, well not all the way, but we wanna basically get this corner lined up with the rocker, and then we're gonna kind of guesstimate our top. I know the tops had to go out because we already had it test fit on the car, and you can see we got plenty of adjustability. So let's leave the top out. We're gonna pull the bottom in, line with this rocker. We're gonna try to work it a little bit more and get this corner, and we're gonna go ahead and do the other side, and we'll come back to it. Here's another look at the door installation and time lapse. Basically, Chase is holding the back of the door up as level as we can. We're getting all the bolts started. Once we get all the bolts started, and that's key, if you tighten one of the bolts down, there's a backing plate, and if that's cocked a little bit, you won't be able to get the other bolts started. So he's sticking a panel gapping tool at 3/16 in the back, and I'm basically working the front, and we're just aligning the door. So this is the only original part for the 69 Firebird on the front end. As you could see, as we were test fitting, the hole didn't line up here, but it lined up here. So I'm gonna show you with this video how we went through welding the rest of the holes and cleaning up, just so you see the process. So we're gonna weld around the outside, get the welding helmet on, and we're just doing tacks just right around the edge. And we're gonna close up this hole right here. I think this is what takes your restoration to the next level. When you sit there and you fill in all the holes and you grind them back down, so if someone's under the car, you don't see where a bolt's misaligned or anything like that. So you could see the whole point of this, I traced out where the bolt was, and we basically moved the hole over to its new location. We're gonna let it cool down, and I'm gonna come in here, just sand it off with a belt sander, and the belt sander will just run that through on both sides, and you're never gonna know. Yes, you could build a patch and weld around it. If you're worried about like external body parts and sheet metal warping, absolutely you have to do this. This is such a thick panel and so strong, and it's an area that we're not worried about warping. I just hit it with the MIG welder. So we're gonna finish cleaning this up and we'll get them bolted on. All right, so the next step, I like to put the inner fenders on the fenders. Little things about these aftermarket fenders. You could see I did have to cut this one. This is the passenger side. And what I was doing, this center part right here was sticking out too far. So the rest of the fender profiled here and here, and it was coming out too far. So we cut it and we pulled the fender in, and I welded up the gap. So we'll get a little bit of paint on that. I'm just showing you what you're gonna have to do on some of these aftermarket fenders to make them fit. Same thing on this one. I don't know if you could tell. Right here, the hole was about a lot lower. We actually just welded a washer for the bracket on this fender. It just sat way too low on the car itself. Same thing with these two. You can see we kind of ground and re-welded those two holes. That's why no one likes the way these front fenders fit. But if you go ahead, like I said, and you do this, we can make this car work. So let's go get the inner fenders in. Chase is already bolting one in now. That's the one we just welded up. What you want to do, pretty much the easiest way to put them in, you put your clips in first. And what you want the backs of them towards the inside of the fender. So basically, this one's gonna fit a little bit tighter, being that it's an aftermarket versus the factory one. We get the back in first, the wheel lip, and you're basically just rolling it around to where these two clips are lined up. So once you do that, get your bolts in there like he's got, and you just work your way. I like to work my way on the front first, loosening, keeping all the bolts loose. So the idea while you put all these bolts in is gonna be, so you're gonna put these bolts in, and then the two up front, leave them all loose just so you're not fighting this. So let's get these bolts in, we'll come back while we install them on the car. Now we got the inner fenders on the fenders. We're gonna put the inner fenders to firewall bracing on the car. So basically, same thing with the other side. We're gonna just leave these two loose for now, and They just go on like that. It's just going to be easier to get them in now before we put the fenders on. And then these 3 bolts up top are going to go on the inner fender. So once we're done with that, we're going to get the front radiator support. So bushings go inside. We're going to take them off. Again, we got the solid bushings on this one. So good, you could take that off. So what we're going to do, we have the bushing in the bottom. Let me see. Let it go. So the 2 bushings go in the bottom. It's going to be in this furthest hole forward. So we'll put them in there, lift it up, and then you have your washer on top on this kit, and then the bushing that sandwiches over it. Good, you see what I just did? So the hole all the way forward. You'll know because the fenders won't fit. And then on the bottom, it's going to be a washer and a nut. Yep, just like that. Put those 2 in. And now, same thing with this. You want to leave this loose. You're going to see why, because this is going to be able to adjust the whole squareness of the hood and the fenders and everything else. The idea behind this, you want that side-to-side wiggle room without it falling out. So, last thing we're going to do before the fenders is we're going to put our upper cowl vent cover. Now, same thing with this. This is kind of our reference. We got these screws for it. We're going to leave them loose. Again, this is more of a reference for this whole piece. That we're trying to keep it centered, and that's going to set our fenders to make sure we're not too far right or left before we put our hood on. If you've seen any videos of my other videos of the Mopars, we'll put the hood on first and kind of, you know, because the inner fenders are welded on the Mopar cars. These GM cars, you have to get the fenders on, and then that's what sets the hood, which I think makes it a little bit more challenging on the front end, especially with adjusting. So now we got this on. I'll put these other 2 screws in. Let's get the fenders itself on.
You could see how when you install the inner fenders on the fenders, 1 unit out of the car, and you just put them on one time, how much easier it makes that process.
All right, so now we got the fender basically held on there. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to come in here and we're going to set this corner. We're going to set the gap first, because you can see it's trying to push up. So let me get Chase over here. He's going to hold the gap, and we're going to go on the inside with some shims and set that bolt. And this is going to be a trial and error type of deal.
Get the threads of the bolts started before putting shims on.
I used a body shim in there, so basically it's easier to stick in. We could get the bolt mostly started, and then when we got to change it, we don't got to pull the bolts all the way out. There you go. So let's see what we got. So we're a little high, but that's probably going to work, because you see when we pull down on the bottom, it should align these 2 body lines. So we're going to start with that, see where we are. The idea is to get all these body lines in line. So we're going to start working on the fender and the upper cowl next, and then we'll do the other side.
Right here in this adjustment, I like to use washers, just because when you're trying to spin it around, the body shims come out. So just grab some flat washers. You could stick body shims under this top area.
Now we got the whole top of the fender. The front's still loose here, but now the back's all tightened up and our gap up top looks pretty good. We go ahead and just put this bracket in down here to the inner fender loose. Go ahead, Chase.
The only bad thing about leaving the bolts loose to the inner fender support bracket to the firewall is they're really hard to get to. You might have to just tighten them up, guess on the inner support bracket, adjust accordingly, then install the fender after if you don't have small hands.
All right, so now we got both fenders in. We got the whole tops of them kind of tightened down, and we're trying to set our distance apart, because that's going to be our hood distance off this top cowl vent piece. So you can see I got a little bit of gap here, but the bottom of both of them are tight. These aftermarket parts aren't perfect. We're not going to worry about it right now. We'll come back to it. Now, the big problem right now with the aftermarket parts, our biggest issue, and I've done a couple of these cars, and each one of these inner fenders, they seem to be the same problem. What they want to do, I think they're stamped wrong, and what they want to do, they want to curve the fender out, if you could see it. So this lower corner is pulled out, and no matter what I do, I'm fighting that inner fender. I made the mistake years ago lining one of these cars and doing the whole body gap, setting the hood, everything without the inner fenders on here, and everything was perfect. We go put these inner aftermarket fenders on, and then now we're back to square one and they're yanked out. So if we look at the other side, you can see this side first, the gap is right here. It sticks out about a 1/4 inch, and as you can see, when we go up, it starts leveling itself out. So this back bolt is where it needs to be. If we look at the other side, the factory one, you could see how much better the gap is, and don't forget, that's an OEM inner fender. It just fits perfect. So like I said, I'm pretty sure multiple cars and everything, the stamping's wrong. So back to this one, what we're going to end up doing, that's worked for me in the past, we're going to try to put a slit right down here, and that should relieve this whole fender and let us roll it in on itself. We're basically I'll pie cut it, and we'll come back through, tack it, and weld it once everything is set in place and all adjusted properly. So let's cut it first and see what it does, and we'll see if that helps it.
Cut a little at a time. You could always come back and keep adding to it.
Before we cut too much, you can see that's already getting us to come in a little bit. We're probably going to have to come in a little bit more, and we might have to take a ratchet initially to let it roll over itself before we weld the bottom. But you see how much more movement I got in this thing? So yeah, see, we're trying to bend up. We're going to come up a little bit more and cut it, and then we're going to try it again. And like I said, we might have to pull a ratchet over this thing and then tack the bottom where we actually want it, so we're not fighting it.
This part won't be welded until the car is completely gapped.
Oh yeah, you can see how much better that is already. So let's get a ratchet. Yeah, let's get a ratchet, and I'm gonna ratchet it down, pull it where it needs to go, and then we're gonna mark it and recut it and tack it, and hopefully that'll stay in place.
The reason we're doing the front of this 69 Firebird versus setting the back first is look at the body lines and how pronounced they are. They're so much harder to align versus the quarter to door, which is basically a straight curve. So we're going to focus on the front. This is the inner wheelhouse that we cut and the overlap piece on itself. Like I said, we won't weld it until later when we're ready to completely finalize, gap, and fit the car. At this point, I'm installing the hinges on the car. I like to do these hinges with the springs off for the first time, and you can see I kind of put them down and I'm angling them at the same angle as the fenders, eyeing them up. Once I got a good guesstimation where I want the hinges, we're going to make this a little bit easier on ourselves, and we're going to just set the hood on the car. This is good for test fitting, and you might have to move your fenders a little bit more, but if everything fits, Megan climbed in the car. She's going to get the 2 front hinge bolts in. You're able to access them through the bottom. She's going to screw them in. Once she's done with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to lift up the hood, and then she'll be able to access the 2 rear hinge bolts. Once we get all 4 of them in, we're still kind of leaving them loose, and I'm going to adjust the hood on the car where I want it right now, and she's going to reach in there with a ratchet wrench and just tighten them up, and then we should be good to go. So saying that, now that the hood was on the car, we found that we were having some problems with the front fenders aligning right. So here's a perfect example of the deburrer tool and how I go about opening up an area with the deburrer tool. Once I get it done, we'll go back through, we'll make sure we weld this upon the final gapment and fitment of the car, so you can't see where we cut out. I'll mark it beforehand. You could see you could also get the radiator support in the car with the fenders and everything. So when we put the radiator support on first, that's not the only way to get it in. You could just roll it right in through the front. So there's just different ways of doing this. Like I said, I like to use the radiator support as my go-to. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to just adjust the front end side to side and just try and see if we can get the hood gap cleared.
All right, so looking at the hood and everything, our gap over here is kind of tight, and it's rubbing down here. Basically the hood's kind of coming at an angle towards the passenger side just a little bit. Same thing with over here. We try to band-aid it up in the radiator support, and I've seen a lot of these cars where the aftermarket radiator supports, you have to shim out. But I think what's going to have to happen right now is we're basically have to come back to the drawing board. Why? This hood's forward, I believe. This whole fender's pushed forward a little bit. So we're following the arch of the fender because we have to align the front pieces, and you could see it's a little bit forward here. So what we're going to have to do, I told you we don't weld in the rockers, being that the rocker was our base off our door support lined up down here. So what we're going to end up doing, I'm going to cut you out. I'm going to spend today, the next couple hours, we're going to just pull the fender off, the hood off, and we're going to unscrew the rocker, move the rocker back. We're going to actually move the rocker back this exact distance, which is 1/8 of an inch, probably go a little bit more. Now the rockers on both sides are in line with each other off the bolts that were on this car. But like I said, we're just going to make this thing a little bit better. So I think the better thing to do versus trying to fix it in the hinges and readjust everything, like I said, move the rocker back a little bit, move the door back, let the fender ease back, and let the hood then turn back around, and that will be lined up. And you see our adjustment we have in the front radiator support. We should be able to align everything. So let me get to that. That's the plan. I'm gonna come back and we'll show you what we ended up with.
Once I got the hood and fender off, you see a couple taps and the screws out of the rocker, it just slid right back. Then we're going to go ahead and follow the door, back that up the same distance, and reinstall our parts.
All right, so I brought you back because I decided to just tackle this before the night was over. It's one of those things I'm going to just keep thinking about, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Right now, even with the adjustments on the hood and everything, I have an hour into the process of just removing the rocker, 45 minutes or so. What we're looking at now though, both sides, the gaps are they're really close. They're about 1/8 of an inch on both sides in the front, and you see the back on both sides is really, it's not touching, but it's almost touching. So I'm gonna have to address that when I gap the car. I'm assuming I'll have to measure the factory hood, which I still have, that this hood is a little bit wider with the stamping than the factory hood, because this cowl panel is really setting our gaps. And really from the start, these doors I had to come out more than I thought they would, than I thought they should be. But moving that rocker that little bit really changed the whole complexity of the car. That's why I stressed it on the last video. We don't weld in the rockers, because we still have to get the whole back of this car on. But we're not done with this car yet. What I'm gonna end up doing, I'm gonna take a break tonight. We're gonna go back through. I'm gonna fine tune everything. A door's gotta come out over there. Now we have it all about where we want it. But as you can see, the hood opens and closes. I gotta adjust that panel. We got our stoppers in there, everything solid, straight. We're gonna try to put the front nose on the car just to make sure everything there's no surprises. But all in all, I'm really happy with the way it is. You know, like I said, we got a little bit of adjustment. Once we get the springs in, they'll help it. But all in all, I'm gonna start the fine-tune adjustment on what we have installed right now. I'll bring you back when we do the front end, and we'll finish this project off.
So we're really going to install this whole front nose section just to verify everything else is straight. Don't forget, our radiator support had some movement in it because I deburred out the holes. So what we're doing, we want to make sure that the hood and fenders are pointed in the straight. So this nose piece basically comes off the front subframe, and then it has a little bit of adjustability in it too, which is completely acceptable. But we want to make sure we don't put this nose cone on and find out we're 2 inches off on the fenders, and our whole fenders front end might not be square. It shouldn't, but the more pieces you put on in this process, the easier it is to verify and not be surprised when you go to final fitment or paint and body. The bumper isn't really necessary, but I also did want to verify the center of the hood falls in line with the center of the Pontiac bumper, since it's so pronounced on this car. We're now going to put the lower front valance in the car. If you want to make it easier on yourself, go ahead and put the latch assembly in your car that comes off the radiator support, and it actually supports the bottom of this valance. And then you could bolt in the center of the valance first so it doesn't kind of sag down. It didn't bend it or anything. It was just trying to obviously bow it right here. It's kind of fighting it a little bit. It would have been easier if I put that support in first, but we're going to do this backwards and the hard way. So you got the 2 bolts on the outside, and then you got 1 going to the inner fenders. Once you screw them in, it gives it a little bit more support. And then, like I said, once we put the latch assembly back in, which we're doing right now, there's 2 screws in the top, and then it holds a piece in the front of the valance and 1 in the bottom. It really strengthens the whole thing up and really sets the gap on everything else. I think all in all, this is about everything you need to put on to really verify the fitment of the front end of the car. You see with the valance how good everything really came together.
Wrapping up the video on the 69 Firebird, I have you over here on the 74 Cuda. I just want to show you a couple things because my point of what I do on the Firebird kind of really comes through on this car, and I'll show you why. Basically, we have the whole front end put on the Firebird, bolted on, adjusted to the best of our ability without completely panel gapping, welding the car. I don't have anything on the back structure installed yet at all. The reason being, for instance, on this Cuda, it went through the same process. Right now, the whole front end's bolted on the car. The rear structure, nothing is welded. Not the inner wheel wells, the outer wheel wells, everything is completely movable still. So what I did on this car first, I first put the door on just like the Firebird, adjusted off the rocker just like I showed you in this video. We got it lined up with, we put the quarter panels on this car first knowing we're just test fitting them, but then I bolted on the whole front structure. What I found out when we made these hood gaps perfect, we're kind of talking better than what Mopar would have done. We made these hood gaps all the way around 3/16 of an inch. Basically, it was trying to suck in this door too much, and it couldn't, both of these couldn't line up when I lined this structure up. So what I basically had to do to make sure the door profiles up here is, you see we got this gap when we go off the bottom rocker panel. So we're good up to about here, and a quarter panel has to be sunken in. So now that we don't have the rockers or the quarters welded on the car, what I'm going to do, we're going to remove this quarter. I'm going to grind out behind it a little bit. Then when we test fit this quarter on the car, we're going to roll this quarter panel in to match this door seam since it's not welded. So what that's going to enable us to do is have a super straight body line with no filler front to rear, and then we're going to fix the quarters on the back. If I welded this quarter panel before the front end was on the car, everything from here back would have been perfect, but when we bolt the fender on, that's where we have issues. So that's the idea why we put the front ends. You don't have to put the front ends on the car first. I just had all the front end parts. We could have just test fit the rear end, but I really want to just gap and, you know, adjust everything on the Firebird the best we could before we go ahead, and I'm going to try to line the back off the car since nothing's there. So what you see we got really good gaps along the bottom coming down. The rockers are lined up with the doors, and really our gap right here looks really good all the way up for the most part. This corner of the fender is going to be hit down. It's kind of rolled up a little bit, so we'll hit that down. Coming out to the front, you can see the fenders. They look pretty good. Now these are all aftermarket fenders up here. If you see this corner right here, we have the 69 Firebird nose on the car, and every aftermarket fender I've seen, you have this lip on it. Be prepared, you're gonna have to slice it. I've done it on a couple of these cars. Right up here, cut the corner, and you're gonna fold them in. Looking at the hood gaps, and then we'll open the hood. We got the hood. We got a good, it's about an 1/8 inch gap. It's really tight on both sides, but you see both sides, it's profiled really well. The front end needs a little bit of adjustment, but all in all, we're just test fitting parts on there. Like for instance, the bumper's gotta be pushed in. But like I said, this is a rough fitment of the parts. I did actually put the hood latch in the car. So we don't have the hood springs in it, but we got the hood latch in the car, hood's adjusted, we'll put the hood hinges on. All the bolts on the inside are tightened down, and really, all in all, hood closes solid. Looking around this side, you know, same thing on this one. You got that corner gap we're gonna have to fill in, and we're gonna have to see how that pulls over. We're gonna work this edge and pull that in and over. So there's still some fine tuning. Down this side, it's a little bit tight up here, but the doors are profiled really nice. You know, we got panel to panel gapping. Same thing with this bottom. A good clean edge. We gotta fix the door still, but I didn't want to mess with the door until we knew all these parts are gonna fit, and that goes the same thing with the back. For some reason, we put this thing on, it might not fit at all. So, all in all, this should be an easy bolt-on video. You see there's actually just as much work in the front of these cars as there is the back of them. You got to remember, everything on this car is not perfect right now, but there's no filler on this car. These are all bare metal, all brand new parts. So to get the fitment on them right, actually I think the car came out pretty good. What we're going to do next on this video, we're going to start doing the rear end of this car. There's a lot of parts missing back there, so we're going to get on that. And stay tuned for that. It's going to be a little bit. I got to dig all the parts out and everything else. So we're going to get fitment on that. We're going to do the same thing, test fit the whole back end, and when everything's fit up, I'll bring you back and we'll start officially installing the parts. Hope this video helps you if you're installing the front end on the first gen F-body. Novas are going to be very similar. Hopefully this helps you out on how to do some panel adjustment, how to get doors on the car, just everything in general on as far as bolt-on sheet metal. So stay tuned for future videos. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, subscribe, and comment to the rest of our videos if you like what you see, and we'll see you on the next time.